Okay, before we start, some short notes for this event. Your cameras are off and your microphones are muted for now, but later on you will be able to participate actively. You can either give me a sign by raising your hand, or you may also post your input via the chat function. And now I wish you all a very warm welcome to the webinar, Affordable Mobility in the African Automotive Sector. My name is Claudia Voss, and I'm the Managing Director of Afrika-Verein, the German African Business Association. This webinar is organized by the African Association of Automotive Manufacturers, better known as AAAM, the German Association of the Automotive Industry, also known as VDA, and Afrika-Verein. In this threefold combination, we organize a lot of events and even delegation trips together. And this for a very good reason, because we all follow the same vision and mission wholeheartedly, which is the expansion and deepening of the automotive industry across the whole African continent. Let me shortly sum up. Where do we stand today? 42 cars per 1,000 individuals in Africa, compared to a global average of 182. Plus, most of these average 42 cars in Africa are used cars. The reasons: limited disposable incomes and relatively high costs for new vehicles. Further challenges are the lack of high quality after-sales service and poor quality fuels. Plus, Africa's population is growing rapidly and urbanization is speeding up. That means the need for mobility is increasing daily in the cities, but also in the rural areas. Therefore, there is an urgent need to find innovative and affordable solutions to move people from A to B. And it should be in the interest of Europe and Germany that Africa's roads are no longer dominated by old used cars, but that modern, environmentally and economically viable vehicles become available in African countries. There is, above all, a need for suitable financing conditions for the car purchase, as affordability is the main obstacle to building a viable African vehicle market. This is where we stand today, so there is still a lot to do and therefore no time to waste. Let's get things started. On the panel today, we have Serge Kamuhinda, CEO of Volkswagen Rwanda Mobility Solutions, Ashid Shah, Chair of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, short KAM, Auto Chapter in Kenya, Tim Jacques, CEO of Motors Africa, and Frederick Sedu, Senior Trade Specialist, Trade and Finance at Afrexim Bank. Tim, I would like to start with you. Motors Africa, a division within the South African listed Motors Holdings, operates as the head company of multiple East African distributors and dealerships with presences in Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, and Malawi. From a dealer's perspective, where do you see the role of the OEMs and dealers to provide affordable mobility, and how do you see this evolving? Tim.
Right. Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's a very pertinent question, but let me start by saying that Motors is a non-manufacturing business in the automotive sector. And as you've said, Motors Africa is a dealer group that operates in East Africa. So I speak predominantly from a dealer point of view in the Eastern African area. I think in terms of affordability, it's important first and foremost to understand sort of the scope of what we are talking about. Affordability, firstly, we should look at vehicle pricing first and foremost. What goes into a vehicle's cost? What goes into a vehicle's price? Well, of course, firstly, and bear with me stating some of the obvious, but it's just important to contextualize a little bit. Firstly, we have the FOB price of the vehicle. After that, we have logistics. We must get the cars to the countries. Following which we have duties, we have various clearing costs, local costs, registration costs, etc., etc. And then, of course, we're impacted by the currency of the country where we send our car to. And all of that feeds into the costs the landed cost of the vehicle, and the cost of making the car available for purchase. Once the car is available for purchase, then of course financing and insurance comes in, and this will be discussed in some detail later, so I won't go into too much detail now on that. But after the vehicle is sold to the consumer, one has to take into consideration the cost of ownership. These comprise various things. In a nutshell, we have really the cost of maintaining the vehicle. That's all the services and the repairs. We have the spare parts that go into all of that, consumables, oils, and these items are all also affected by FOB prices, logistics, duties, currency, and so on. So what, as a dealer, just to interject from Motus's side, we, for example, in order to assist in consumers in terms of affordability, is we offer, for example, free service plans across our region. For 2 years, customers get their servicing for free, and that's one way that we've tried to assist consumers in terms of having affordable mobility. There's also, big moves from OEMs. There's a lot of effort that goes in that we can see from a dealer point of view. Things like reducing the frequency of services, big efforts on parts, more affordable parts, and so on and so forth. Other costs of ownership include fuel costs, of which we don't have a lot of direct control at all. There's been a lot of effort there too by OEMs for many, many years to make sure that vehicles consume less fuel and are more economical. Even though our markets have taken slightly longer to adapt to the concept of smaller engines, these really have made an enormous difference in terms of cost of ownership and affordability of vehicles. And then lastly, and there are other things, but one of the other big elements of cost of ownership, of course, is depreciation, or the price of the resale of the vehicle a few years down the line. This is significantly in our region impacted by the used car imports that come into all of Africa, really. In East Africa, it's predominantly from Japan. So this affects the resale price of cars, and therefore means that cars have a much higher depreciation and then therefore cost a whole lot more. So, what do we have control over as dealers when it comes to pricing, when it comes to affordability, when it comes to these things? Well, a lot of effort and constant effort is going into things like logistics costs, finding consolidated solutions, cheaper solutions, better solutions to get the cars and get the parts to the countries for just that little bit cheaper. There's areas in as far as maintenance is concerned. I've already mentioned service plans and things like that assist the customer and sort of prevent surprise costs coming on further down the line. We also we put a lot of effort, enormous amount of effort into offering trade-ins more and more in our region. Some years back, trade-ins were less heard of, but more and more we do trade-ins in East Africa. This helps with that notion of depreciation and that cost that the customer has to endure with the depreciation. So when it comes to affordable mobility and what can be done at our level, I think we've said we go into all of these areas. We do our best to bring the prices down, but one can't ignore one of the bigger aspects that will bring the price of a car down, and that's local assembly. So we work closely with OEMs. OEMs ultimately look at the viability of assembling a vehicle in any market locally, and we work closely with these OEMs to try and see where this is possible. Of course, the markets in East Africa are small in relation to other markets where local assembly takes place, and so the scale of these operations has to be taken into consideration. But certainly the AAAM has been involved in that quite actively. Import duties is still something that dealers are able to not control, because these are set, of course, by government. We do try and lobby, we do try and talk to governments to see where and how things like duties and import duties can perhaps be looked at. And then lastly, or not lastly, this is a big topic, but one of the areas that certainly does assist the consumer from an affordability point of view is the change of mobility. What do I mean by that? People today are not just necessarily needing to automatically buy a vehicle. We have Uber, we have other ride-hailing services, for example, that have changed the way that people commute. Perhaps today people don't need a car in the same way that they maybe needed to some years back. And even though it may be slow, this reduces the cost of commuting in general, and makes the sort of affordability of movement to be better. So what do dealers do when it comes to this change in the dynamics of transportation, really, is, well, we can firstly help to promote more entry-level type vehicles that cater for these these hailing services. For example, these are available from OEMs, and it's our job to make sure that these are promoted and make sure that these companies are aware that these vehicles, we have these vehicles in our markets. And we are seeing already that the smaller segments of the markets are starting to show an increase in volumes due to these kinds of services that are growing in the markets. Moreover, dealers and distributors can offer fleet and leasing solutions to these types of consumers. Of course, leasing and fleet takes place already, and is in certain markets not yet, but in some markets it's quite developed. And this happens already, particularly with governments. But to the smaller sort of man on the street, sort of Uber driver, this is something that we're starting to look at making available. And this is a way that we can reduce sort of overall cost and make it more easy for us, for a driver to come in and purchase a new car rather than going the route of a used car. Of course, it's another discussion perhaps for later on today, but the used car cost of ownership is another dynamic entirely. It actually costs quite a lot more to run a used car that's come from another country than it is a new car that's been purchased in the country that's been adapted for that country. So I think in a nutshell, it was important to, let's conceptualize what are these costs, what can we do, what are we doing about these costs, what's in our control, and some of the things that dealers experience with regards to affordability.
Thank you, Tim. You raised the aspect of change of mobility, and this is an aspect that we want to dive deeper into now. Serge, Volkswagen is a key role player on the African continent. It has plants in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana. And in Rwanda, a relatively small market, there Volkswagen, together with several partners, tried something different, a whole mobility concept. Please tell us what it is about. And as you are also a political analyst that I read, and you also have been the deputy head of the strategy and policy unit at the office of the president in Rwanda, maybe you can also give us an insight on how Rwanda is trying to find its position in the automotive value chain. Serge, up to you.
Thank you very much. It is quite an exciting time actually to talk about transport. I'll start maybe, as you said, from a political analysis point of view. Transport is one of the major expenditure of a household. It facilitates the economy or makes the economy much more costlier. And when you look at the numbers for Africa, transport is actually responsible to make African goods less competitive. So that's the starting point. And of course, this extends also to people, the movement of people. When people want to move, the problem is not where they are going to, but how they are going there. So it's quite a problem. And you would say, okay, these are problems that have been there since decades. So what's new about it? What's new about it is that we are looking at this problem when there are two revolutions coming together with really fast speed. The first revolution is the new powertrain technologies, where the internal combustion engine is being replaced by green solutions such as electric batteries. And the other revolution, of course, is the connected car. Now, this brings us from a problem of affordability to a problem of inclusion. In less than 5 years, basically, major economies in the world will start to shift dramatically towards electric connected vehicles. This means that Africa will actually have a problem of inclusion on top of affordability, because if Africa is not able to use that technology because there are no infrastructure, then Africa will actually be excluded from the modern transport technology. And this comes on top of the problem that these new technologies are actually more expensive. So it is quite a dramatic situation that is happening, and which every African country should look at. The good news is that this comes when African countries have put themselves together to create an automotive value chain across the continent using the CFTA. So Rwanda came at the crossroads of all these developments, the new continental automotive market, the new technologies in the car, and said, what can be done? And you could have spent a lot of years researching about it, but Volkswagen had the industrial bravery to say, look, let's try something new, and let's see whether this new trend of more digital services within the car can actually be a solution to lower the hurdle of affordability for African consumer. So whereas you have in Europe, the digitalization trend coming because of consumer preferences and simply because of technological evolution, digital services in Africa come to enable the use of new cars and to spread the cost amongst many users. And that is what we have done with our integrated mobility solution, where we have various services, ride-hailing, corporate fleet services, airport shuttles, and we used digitalization as a way to lower the cost of usage. You have one asset that is being used amongst many people, but one new asset. And that new asset can then become actually, after a few years, a newer used vehicle, which is different from the used vehicles that we see being imported from outside Africa, which are always more than 10 years old and have not contributed in their DNA to the industrialization of the continent. So digitalization is a trend that is coming, but it's good news for Africa because it can help the topic of affordability. Now, when it comes to green technologies, the good news for Africa is that they are quite new everywhere. So Africa can actually join the wagon of innovation and see where it makes sense for Africa to position herself. Right now, Volkswagen also didn't wait, and we are trying with Siemens to basically test electric vehicles under tropical conditions. Siemens is providing charging infrastructure, Volkswagen the cars, and we have already learned very viable insights as to which electric vehicle is more suitable for the African continent. And that is going to be very important moving forward, especially now that you're actually in an era of deglobalization. You may find that if you have products that can only work or that are better suited for the African continent, you may have difficulty to find plants producing those vehicles simply because they are focusing on other more lucrative markets. And this is where the topic of CFTA is very important, because Africans will wake up to the reality that if they do not produce their own cars, no one will do this for them. And they may actually not be able to import the new technology that is within the cars because the technological conditions are not met. And that is why in Rwanda, but also in Kenya and Ghana, Volkswagen is pushing the agenda towards regional value chains and towards really starting right away with assembly facilities that are designed to start the journey of regional value chains. And we hope that in the near future, we can have plants across many regions in Africa, and each country within a specific region will contribute to that value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge. We stay in East Africa, and from Rwanda we head to Kenya. Ashit, you are the voice for the automotive manufacturers in Kenya. And last year, the World Bank published a feature story titled "Kenya's Digital Integration Has Transformed Kenya's Transport Sector." Please tell us a bit about this transformation and the innovative mobility solutions in your country, and also where do you see this heading? Serge.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Claudia. Yes, Kenya is really transformed in the digital world. Before, we used to spend 6 months getting a driving license manually. We used to travel probably 100 kilometers to the nearest office for the revenue authority or the government authorities to get a license. Today, we can get all that done online and probably get our license in by a couple of days, 3 days, 4 days. The same thing used to happen for vehicle licensing, which used to take a very long time. The logbooks used to take a very long time. It would probably take 3 to 4 months minimum to get a logbook. Now we can probably have all the logbooks done electronically done. This system was actually introduced, and it's called the Transport Integrated Management System, called TIMS. And this has actually changed the whole ballgame of how people get their online access to all the vehicles within the country. This has really reduced fraud and people bring fake documents to banks, to financing the vehicles, to insurance companies. People used to have logbooks, ghost cars, you would say, right? And now that has really stopped because it's all online and we can actually check on whatever's happening. This in turn, the whole ICT sector has really developed and given prospect to a lot of new jobs in all the sectors. Uber, Bolt, I mean, that has done wonders for Kenya in the last 3 to 4 years. This has also increased the motorization rate in Kenya, hand in hand. And the TIMS software platform has actually, we must have registered about 1.5 1.5 registrations online in the last about 4 years. This would have taken decades and all that. And this came in hand with the motorization rate in Kenya increasing from about 15 to 30, as the middle class in Kenya also increased as well at the same time. We would say digitalization, basically, we used to spend a lot of money wasting time on getting our logbooks and everything in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashit. Let's bring in our finance expert at this point, Frederick. You are a senior trade specialist at AAAM Bank. The Pan-African Trade Finance Bank was established in 1993 in Nigeria by African governments, private and institutional investors, as well as non-African investors. And last year, AAAM Bank and AAAM signed an MOU to drive automotive investment in Africa. Please tell us what innovative financing solutions have been identified in recent AAAM Bank funded research. Frederick.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. I'm sorry, I was unmuting myself. So let me start by saying that we are focusing on financing under a study that we're doing together with AAAM and Deloitte. However, from an affordability point of view, we do not feel financing is the only panacea for Africa. Again, when we conceptualize the issue of affordability, we see 3 main elements coming into play. So we look first at the issues of policy, And here we're looking at, as said, we need to build our own cars. So we're looking at issues of policy. There are no harmonized standards when it comes to African automobiles, for example. There's the issue of proliferation of second-hand vehicles. Okay, there's issues of vehicle identification, homologation, and things like that. So all these policy issues that, as a bank, we believe if properly addressed, can help address the issue of affordability in the long term. And so we don't only look at financing, but we want to start first with policy, and which is one of the areas we have been pushing very hard on, working with AAAM. We're really working very hard to ensure that all African countries can develop an auto policy. What we have done as a bank is to offer grant financing, make grant financing available for the development of an auto policy, which serves as a guide for most African countries in their efforts to attract automotive manufacturing. And of course, we're also working with ASU to ensure that there's standardization in the auto sector, so that the vehicles you manufacture in South Africa are qualified to be exported into Ghana without having to be researched and things of the sort. So we're focusing on policy as one of the key interventions as a bank to ensure that affordability is vehicle affordability is realized. Then, of course, we go to a second pillar as a bank that also looks at the fact that there are non-existent value chains, as Sage has mentioned. There are non-existent value chains, auto value chains in Africa. And this is due to the lack of infrastructure, the high logistics cost, as Tim mentioned. And so as a bank, we again recognize that there's the need to do some form of auto mapping of the continent. So what we want to do is to adopt a hub and spoke model that recognizes how some big economies can probably be hub countries, manufacturing countries, and surrounding countries, regional countries, can then act as spokes to those hub countries. So yes, we are doing this auto mapping exercise across the continent that will be based on the comparative advantages of each country. And it provides a technical basis for African countries to really consider the role they can play in the auto value chain and in the development of regional value chains. So we started with ECOWAS, very interesting results coming out of that study. It's yet to be concluded. We want to move on to SADC sometime in Q2 and as well roll out to the rest of the continent early next year. So indeed, we're focusing on how to also develop value chains that will attract OEMs into Africa. Again, and again, we're looking at this from an affordability point of view, because if you realize 75% of vehicle sales in Africa is in South Africa, is in Egypt, is in Morocco. Why is that the case? It's a question of affordability, because these are manufacturers. They demand what is manufactured in countries. So to the extent that Africa is able to attract more OEMs into various countries, then it goes that the logistics cost of those vehicles will be less. And therefore, the affordability would also increase in those countries that are not currently not manufacturing countries. So again, that is why we think the value chain approach is also important. And we are not only looking at incentivizing the growth of OEMs in the hub countries, but we're looking at the general infrastructure in Africa. We're looking at industrial parks, we're looking at export processing zones, we're looking at auto parks, just generally critical trade enabling infrastructure that will provide seamless transportation in components and parts within the continent, improve the cost or reduce the cost of logistics in Africa to make it very, very efficient. And then, of course, we go to the last bit, which is financing. And in financing, we recognize that indeed in Africa, we have almost nearly double-digit interest rates in Africa. The cost of vehicles, as Tim said, very high. And as Ted has also mentioned, there's the general lack of asset-based financing and products in Africa. So together with Deloitte, we're developing specific bespoke product programs that seek to address some of these issues of lack of asset-based financing products. So we are looking at issues of mobility financing, as Sej has mentioned, distributorship financing that may interest some of our colleagues on the call as well. Then we're also looking at value chains, fleet financing, and things of the sort. So these are bespoke products that we intend to introduce into the market to improve the demand and affordability of vehicles generally. As a development finance institution, we recognize that long-term funding is expensive. So what we are doing is to leverage our investment grade rating to attract cheaper development costs, development funding that we can on-lend to commercial banks in country, which is one of the programs we are looking at, on-lend to commercial banks who then lend to the final consumers. So these are some of the quick products that we're looking at implementing in the near future to improve general affordability and supporting the growth of the auto sector in Africa. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Frederick. Now we had the first round and we heard all the panelists. That means we can start the discussion, and therefore I would like to bring in the audience now. So if you want to join us, please once again raise your hand or post your question in the chat. That's what Laila El Marabdi did. She raised the question: do you think Africa should benefit from special vehicles that are relatively cheap? She's giving the example of Citroën, made in India for India. Would that be profitable for OEMs considering the low volumes? Maybe, I don't know, who would like to answer? Serge, maybe?
Sure. It's a good point. We can learn from India, and all the studies Frederick could tell you as well, that we actually benchmarked the sub-Saharan market, automotive market, to India. And we saw, for example, that in sub-Sahara has actually more people in the middle class than India. So we could have vehicles that are suitable for the market. There are topics that are really particular to Africa, and the climate, but also the roads condition require high ground clearance vehicles. That's why you find everyone loves SUVs. And to the point of the volumes, I wouldn't be worried by that, because there are studies showing that the volumes are actually quite there, on the one condition that we fix the problem of cheap imports. Vehicles that are dumped on the African continent that are ready for recycling, but that are dumped on the African continent. If we fix that, we will have enough volumes to sustain the local industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge. Ronnie Govender raised his hand. You want to join us? If so, please come in. Connie, would you let him in?
Hi, good afternoon to your panelists. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. I've taken note of your panel's discussion, but no one has covered in terms of training and innovation hubs with the move to digitalization. What is the OEM doing with regard to training? I mean, in South Africa, we got a high unemployment rate, but nobody is talking about, let's set up innovation hubs here in terms of training. So that's one take. And I see your last panelist has given, that's my first comment, but the last panelist has touched about dumping vehicles into Africa. We get new vehicles that don't even meet the safety standards. And some of the branded, and I'm not too sure, I see Timothy or Jock, I think from the Motors Group is carried out, representing the Motors Group here. But, we've had an exposure where the vehicles are not safe. So I need your comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. So who would like to give an answer to the question of digitalization? Probably What about you, Ashit? I think Kenya is a good example.
Thank you. So in terms of training and all that, we have a lot of training facilities which the government has laid down on training, and we have a lot of infrastructure which is already in place. The only issue here is that we need certain OEMs to come in and transfer technology and train our people so that we can develop further. This can also be done digitally and improve on the same. So I think there is a lot of scope, there is a lot of potential on the same, but we need to move from where we are to the next level, and that can only happen by transfer of skills and training and all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. I'm so sorry, but I didn't hear the second part of your question because I seem to have internet interruptions. Can you raise it again, please?
Sorry, Claudia. I think he was talking about vehicle safety.
Okay.
The vehicles manufactured on the continent are not as safe as probably some of the second-hand vehicles that are dumped on our markets.
Thank you so much.
And probably, if I may just go on that, you know, and that is why I said the issue of affordability goes beyond finance. We're seeing, working with AAAM, the need to have an auto policy that defines standards. Okay, so we're working with ASO to ensure that there's a standardization of vehicle standards in Africa, that wherever you go, that is the standard. Okay, and so if all African countries sign up, so far we have standardized 43 standards. I know there's still a way to go, but if we can standardize all the products in the auto sector in Africa, then it improves the safety and security benefits. You know, we just need to ensure that we define to a high level what our standards are as Africans, and once that is defined, and of course must also fit with some of the European standards, because we're not going to function in isolation. We're going to have to rely on some parts and components from Europe and others. And by market size, you're not going to have specific products that are made for African markets. So we need to ensure that the standards are fairly high and fit the European or Japanese or American standards as well. At least they are not inferior, such that we can buy components and supplies that can fit into our value chains and our manufacturing down here in Africa. So policy for me is the starting point. If we can get that right, we're going to be able to improve on the safety of our vehicles as a continent.
Perhaps I could jump in if you don't mind, Claudia.
Yes, of course.
From I think from our side, the vehicles that we sell new are certainly safe. I think the problem with used car imports is that there may be a perception that because the car is big, it is now safe. That's not at all the case. Some vehicles are imported from countries which have very, very different severity ratings. And when used in an environment that is rough or rugged, actually may become unsafe. So in actual fact, the import of used cars, as I think Frederick was saying as well, is quite risky, really. When a new car is sold, at least it has gone through the stringent OEM approvals and processes that take place for that vehicle to be authorized to be commercialized. So it's important to point that out. Thank you.
Claudia, can I also add on something, please?
Of course, Ashit.
Yeah, thank you. And I absolutely believe what Tim and Frederick have absolutely said. If you look at South Africa exports 80% of their vehicles which are manufactured out of South Africa. 50% of them are actually, they end up in Europe or Australia or America, right? And they have all the OEMs to the strict standards of whatever is produced locally. So in terms of standards, I don't see why the standards cannot be developed and made locally. I sometimes feel that certain standards in terms of suspension and cooling systems, I think the standards in Africa are much more higher than what you would get in Europe and America. Okay, so that the car is much more rugged and all that, but that depends on the country you are in. That's number one. I think the other issue we're looking at second-hand vehicles, we find a lot of vehicles which are imported or exported out of Europe and America and Far East, which are more than 8 years old. Now, a vehicle which is 8 years old, which comes into Africa is totally, we don't know how it's run, okay? There are no proper quality checks, emission level checks and all that. So we find that we're actually looking at the issue of global warming, but we're actually moving the issue of global warming from one continent to the other continent. And the world is round, so we're not actually sorting out anything. So what we also need to look at is the policy of trade of second-hand vehicles from one continent to the other. And I think that's very key on how we're going to develop the automotive industry in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashid. I think the question to be raised is, will second-hand cars assembled in Africa and compete with internationally imported used cars? And let me bring in Dave Coffey, maybe, the CEO of AAAM, because as far as I know, Dave's point of view is used vehicles should ultimately come from vehicles assembled in Africa. Dave, is that correct? You want to join us in the discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Claudia. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We cannot see you, but we can hear you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and maybe if I could just comment first about scale and policy. So there's a lot of discussion around the policy. The policy is not just a bunch of incentives. It's about the standard. It's about the training. It's about the infrastructure, creating demand. We see that that scale will take place on the continent. We're part of the world's largest single market. So we have the vision that the demand will be 5 million vehicles in the next 15 years. And just consider what that will do. That will allow the competitive manufacture of vehicles across Africa. That equates to 20 CKD plants in essence. And therefore we will be manufacturing vehicles competitively on the continent. And this includes vehicles that will be entry-level vehicles. So India have done it, 1.3 billion people like Africa. They've got very competitive models that can be done here. Now that needs scale. And there was a question in the comments about the scale. And so you'll get a mix of different segment vehicles being made on the continent. But those vehicles, as you rightly say, I believe, will become used vehicles which attract finance. And the used vehicles can come from vehicles assembled in Africa. That's an important transition. People believe that there's a risk who are involved in that trade, who say that they're going to lose their source of used vehicles. They won't. The source of supply will switch. As Tim says, you have the maintenance plans, you keep the residual value up, and that vehicle then is subject to receiving asset finance. Today, my understanding is, and Tim can comment, that used vehicles coming in are not subject to finance. One doesn't know the condition of the vehicle. It doesn't meet there are no minimum standards requiring it. Some of these vehicles come from original vehicles would not be homologated if they were new on the continent anyway. So with the policy in place, which would have the right standards attached to it, I believe there's a very good opportunity for us to develop a market for used vehicles from vehicles assembled in Africa and to trade the used vehicles across Africa, as long as they meet minimum standards, which is the intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Tim, you would like to comment?
Yes, I think I 100% agree with the points made by Dave. And maybe just in addition about the used car imports, to maybe just to take it a little further.
I think the focus.
The cost, we're talking about cost of ownership, we're talking about affordability. Used cars on the surface, when they come into Africa, appear to be cheaper, and they are cheaper. They cost significantly less than a new vehicle. However, inevitably there are going to be more breakdowns. These are vehicles that are not adapted to fuel. They don't have the same filtration systems. They don't have the same suspension systems, and there will be more breakdowns, which means more cost for the consumer. It also means that there's a very difficult to manage spare parts range in the countries. So that means that there's an enormous variety of vehicles that come into the countries, and to actually get parts and manage parts supply for these vehicles across various different persons that import is very, very, very difficult. And that lowers scale because they're sourced from various different locations, they're sourced from all over the world, there's different smaller quantities of parts coming through to supply that variation. There's also it also leads to the importation of a lot of second tier and even pirate parts, because parts for a 20-year-old vehicle that comes from a country where it should have never been exported is difficult to find. Moreover, there's fuel consumption problems. If you're bringing in a car that's 10 years old, the fuel consumption is higher than a new car, quite simply put. So the consumer's paying more on fuel. They also pollute more. So there's secondary problems. There's health issues. If a city is polluted, and to Ashit's point, removing the problem, people get sick, and there's all the costs and things associated to pollution. So there's really not a lot of factors that would sort of support used vehicles being sort of very beneficial to the consumer in Africa. It also damages the new market. So if you have this influx of 90% of the vehicles sold in the country are used, your new car market becomes mechanically minute, and you have markets that now become what appear to be, although the market, as we've been discussing today, the markets are there, but these markets appear to be too small to manufacture in. So it delays and creates questions around the viability of assembly locally, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some comments that we had on used. To Dave's particular question about financing of used vehicles, no, there's few controls and checks on those cars that are possible. There are financing houses that finance used vehicles in most of the countries that we operate in, but very few checks are possible on whether these cars have in fact been properly maintained and whether these cars are viable for these markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I can see that George Makatito wants to join us. George, are you with us?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the time. And I want to thank the panelists for very good contributions. I have 4 comments or questions. One of them I posted. Is there a possibility for the automotive industry, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, to start supporting the automotive industry in Europe? Given that though the auto industry in sub-Saharan Africa is not even actually supporting the industries in this area, I'm going to tie it to another question. Given that Afrexim Bank is with us, can there be financing for local players in automotive parts manufacturers in terms of financing? And that one should support my first question about supporting Europe. In other words, can Africans start supporting automotive industry in Europe by making parts locally and exporting to Europe? Then on the other question of vehicle affordability and second-hand, is true. We've been getting a lot of vehicles, second-hand vehicles, especially from Asia. And I agree with Mr. Kofi from AAAM. That's true. We can start by having second-hand vehicles, but originally from Africa. But is there a way to have new vehicles which are affordable to compete with the new imports, second-hand imports? To compete with second-hand imports, especially from Asia, because sometimes part of the problem is affordability. And then, in terms of digitization, is there a possibility of having local environment of people in electronics or digitization, which may be a bit separate from the vehicle to support vehicle mobility. Thank you very much. I submit.
Thank you, George. There was quite a lot of questions. The first one was, is there a possibility to start automotive industry in Europe? What about Dave? Do you want to answer to that question? Because you have, I think, a good overview.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, it's a good question, and we need to develop. I'm just joining as a panelist now.
Dave, it seems we have lost you.
I think you will be able to see me now. I'm almost there.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I got promoted to a panelist. Yeah. For the question, which any of the participants can now. Yeah, it's a journey. So we've got to develop the regional value chains, as have been spoken about. We've got to develop the manufacturing capability in Africa. And that's where we see the regional integration and the continental integration developing the scale that will allow our competitive value chains to be created. There's no reason why, and it's a journey, there's no reason why we can't export vehicles to Europe. South Africa does it, Morocco does it. And so this will take place. So you will find that there was another question from Kashik there. Am I promoting the sub-assembly and then the reassembly in 20 CKD plants? That's not the case. SKD is just a journey. It's just a transition to CKD. We cannot stick on SKD for any length of time. It's a transition to allow CKD to happen. We need CKD plants producing different vehicles across Africa. The OEM CEOs are committed that a vehicle should be produced in one country. It's not good for that country to be produced in CKD in Egypt or Kenya, and then sub-assembled ultimately at SKD in Ivory Coast or Ghana. And that's just a transition. Ultimately, that the other assembly location will have its own CKD unit. So I do believe that as the scale picks up, we will be able to export product, components, and vehicles to Europe as well as to across Africa. It's about getting our competitiveness to the right level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. The second question, George, second question was for Fraxam Bank. Frederick, can there be financing for local automotive manufacturers?
Yeah, yes, and the answer is yes, Claudia. I think his question was whether we can finance local component manufacturers to supply into global value chains. Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes, as Dave rightly said. Our preponderance today is to develop a competitive value chain in Africa, a regional value chain, a continental value chain. If already we have players in Africa that can already tap into global value chains, that have the capacity, we are more than ready to support you. You can reach out to us. I'll just type my email into the chat box. Please just go ahead and send us, reach out, let's have a discussion. We want to support the full length of the value chain in Africa. If you want to do project preparatory financing, we are happy to support you. You want to do the full project financing, we're happy to support you. You want to do CAPEX, we are happy. Working capital, the full value chain of the auto sector. What we do not want to encourage is, as Dave said, just importing vehicles and selling into the African market. We want to have manufacturing on the continent. We want to support manufacturing and distribution of vehicles produced from the continent. That is our motivation. So please, I'll send that email out. Just reach out and we'll be able to talk some more. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Frederick. We have a very active audience and I would like to bring in all of them. That's why I prefer, please, anyone that I bring in, just one question, because there seems to be a very, very much need for all these questions. Francois, you would like to join us. Your question, please.
Yes, hi. Thanks, everybody. Good discussion. But I think, I've been listening to the same argument for many, many years now about the dumping of vehicles in Africa. And although David and his team are doing a great job, I think it's a difficult job because it's not like India. We aren't just one country. But what I'd like to know is, what is the incentive for governments in Africa to stop receiving the so-called dumped vehicles? It's obviously a big business. It's a very lucrative business in Africa. And why should they stop doing it now? I mean, what is the incentive for them to start looking the other way and start doing it differently?
Thank you, Francois. Serge, maybe to you, what is the incentive for governments?
Yes, this incentives, there are incentives which I would say belong to the old world, looking at the fact that those cars are polluting, causing more air pollution related deaths, that they are more costly to run, as has been said, and that those cars actually do not contribute to the local economy. So you find that African countries spend foreign currency to get this technology, which comes outdated and at a high cost. If you include the cost of fuel, in some countries, you see that it's 1/3 of the trade deficit. So macroeconomically speaking, it doesn't make sense. However, there's another incentive, which I alluded to earlier on, is that in future, like Europe is shifting latest 2030, this is less than 8 years. In 8 years, those cars will actually no longer be produced. And if Africa is not prepared to the new technology or find alternatives, maybe with other, like gas-powered vehicles or something like that, then Africa will be stuck. They will be excluded from transport technologies. And I think that is maybe a much more dramatic incentive, because you can tell people that in 8 years, you will be stuck.
Thank you, Serge. David Fuller. Yeah.
If I may just add, I think we need to recognize that the challenges of African governments today are very common. One is jobs. Every African government wants jobs for its youth. To the extent that we are able to incentivize manufacturing of automobiles in Africa, this is and create a value chain that is strong enough that can even support global value chains. We're going to have lots of good paying jobs, high paying jobs that are going to employ lots and lots of people in Africa. And of course, it will underpin the industrialization of Africa. Today, we're exporting all our raw commodities. The auto sector is capital intensive, is knowledge intensive. If we can create and develop this sector as a last frontier, then you can imagine what that portends for the development of our continent. So really, it's about jobs, it's about economic growth, it's about industrialization of Africa. This is our opportunity, and we need to seize it and do all we can to spur the growth of the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. David Furlanger wants to join us. David.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, sorry, yes, I do have a question, but before I do, I just want to correct something that someone said a moment ago, saying that in 8 years' time, South Africa or Africa will be excluded because ICE engines are going to disappear. They're not, of course. Some countries won't allow them after 2030 or 2035, but ICE engines are going to be around for many decades to come. The major volume manufacturers have said that they're going to move towards electric, but ICE will still be around for a long time to come. So we're not suddenly going to be an outcast in the motor industry. But my question is this. In South Africa, down the years, we've tended to look down our noses at cheap Indian and Chinese cars on the basis that we somehow think they're inferior, that their quality is not as good as the Japanese and the American and the German. But of course, as we move into Africa, we're looking more at pricing and value rather than, I don't want to say snobbery, but we have to take a different perspective. So I'd like to hear from the panel whether they think that we can maintain the standards we'd like to, that perhaps Morocco and South Africa as exporters have maintained, or whether we can expect to see more of the cheaper vehicles coming in or being wanted in those other countries.
Okay, I hand this question over to all our panelists. Tim, we start with you.
Okay, that's a very valid question, that actually. The reality is that our consumers are really quite a little bit spoiled because you can get a vehicle so cheap that's fully equipped, that has its 8 airbags and it has all the bells and whistles, and it's coming in very cheap. I think our consumers become used to these very, very well-equipped vehicles. So the cheaper models coming in, and I do know that more and more the entry-level models are very, very well equipped, etc. I'm perfectly aware of that. But nevertheless, the cheaper models don't quite sometimes have the status of even a used vehicle that you can get for even cheaper. So you can see the dynamic, and you can see what it's led to. It's led to almost a type of requirement. It's normal to have a very, very high spec vehicle. And so those entry-level vehicles are not completely suitable. However, we do see, as I said earlier in the conversation, we do see a change happening more on the level of, for example, the Ubers and so on, where we are seeing more of these cheaper cars from India coming in and they're being accepted. So I think that dynamic of juggling between what we can get if we buy used versus what we're going to get if we buy a very entry-level new car is something that's going to take time.
Ashi, do you agree?
Not really. I would also look at it the other way, that there's a very famous car called Toyota Probox, which comes in loads, a second-hand vehicle. Okay, that vehicle does not have 8 airbags, but it's still very popular. It still comes into Africa, everywhere in Africa, and it's very popular. If we manufactured a vehicle like that for the people who really want a low-cost vehicle, I think it's very much possible. For example, in Kenya and East Africa, the governments have actually got together and are ready to give incentives to any manufacturer who wants to come in and manufacture a low-cost vehicle, as long as they use at least 40 to 50% local content and develop it locally. So to me, the price you're going to pay to a very high safety car is going to be much more expensive than a price you're going to pay to a very low cost vehicle, which probably has the basic safety, safety features in it. Okay. So I think it depends where you want to stay in the market and which vehicle do you want to produce. Most of our population in East Africa is people who want an entry-level car, as long as during the weekday they carry passengers, during the weekend they carry goods. And it's a very versatile car which can do basically everything. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashi. Serge, your point of view.
Yes, maybe just a clarification about the phasing out of ICE, which is an important point to consider. There is a scientific way to look at it, not just in a matter of speculation. So there's going to be a point where there's a cost parity between an ICE and EV. And that parity is going to be very driven by policy. And we see that already in many African countries, the SKD advantage or even CKD advantage is comparable to the advantage you get when you import an FBU as EV. And moving forward, you see more and more policy incentives. You are going to track the carbon footprint to the transportation of goods. And it's going to be inevitable that the shift will be, just because it's going to be more costlier to run an ICE, that the shift will come. It will be different from each country, depending on size and road condition, but this time will come, and it's better to prepare for this time. However, I think to the second question, it is true that you may find a segmentation on the world market whereby the luxurious ICEs no longer make sense. And then you have basically ICEs for emerging markets that are going to be the type of vehicles that have been mentioned, either from India or other emerging countries that Africa can also emulate. But there is an important caveat to all of this. Africa has to pay some money to already be at par with the international trends. For example, in terms of fuel quality, in terms of homologation, etc. And some African countries will think about it twice and say, do I now invest in being compliant to get Euro 4, Euro 5 fuel quality in my country, etc., etc., be compliant to import or to have more ICE on the market? Or should I stop and actually go the other way? And you look at countries such as Ethiopia, second biggest market in Africa in terms of population size. You go to Ethiopia and you realize they have consciously made the decision not to push more vehicles that are ICE, and they are pushing now, due to also more excess power in electricity, they are pushing EVs. And I would therefore argue that the question of EVs replacing ICEs will come for Africa in shorter time as many expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge. Frederick, up to you.
So Claudia, I would answer this question by saying that Dave mentioned this earlier on. OEMs will produce vehicles that the market demands. If as consumers the demand increases to 5 million, as Dave said, 20 CKD plants will be opened in Africa, producing exactly what we want as a market. So for me, it's not a question of cheaper products or inferior products. It will be a question of what the market really demands and what the market really wants. If we want very low cost vehicles, that is what the market will produce. But again, as I said, there are lots of things that are also going on that will improve the affordability, general affordability of vehicles in Africa. Today, in Africa, over 80% of vehicles are financed out of pocket. People save to buy vehicles. And that is how come we are having to see people saving $10,000, $15,000 to go buy a used vehicle, because they have to save to buy. The access to financing is not there. But as the economies are evolving, as banks such as Afrexim are intervening in the market, we're looking at vehicle asset financing schemes that will ensure that you do not have to save $20,000 to get a vehicle. You can walk into that showroom and you can be able to get out with a new vehicle based on your income and based on some of the other ideas that have come up in terms of vehicle identification, vehicle tracking systems, and things like that. So there are opportunities to improve financing that will improve access to vehicles, but at the same time, it's generally a question of the forces of demand and supply determining really the type of vehicles that OEMs will produce on our markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. Kaushik Maharaj has raised his hands. Is he with us?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just one question in terms of, and I know the buzzwords have always been dumping, the age of vehicle, safety, volume, price, and also from Exim Bank about the barrier to entry regarding vehicle finance. But is that the dependency on imports, is it not to meet the local demand? I think that is a very important point, is that due to the demand in Africa, whether it's East or West or in Africa, that the cars that have been allowed by the governments of the countries to come from Japan and other Asian countries, if that policy didn't change, and I think we always seem to use that word dumping as a negative connotation, but I think if you have a look at the value chain, did Africa have a choice in stopping the dumping, in inverted commas? But the dependency on imports to meet domestic demand. I think that was the whole demand and supply value chain that added to this. And I think that's a very important point that we can discuss. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Koushik. Dave, would you like to join the discussion once again? Dave is not with us anymore. Okay, then maybe Tim, what about you for this question?
Jump in. I think if there were to be no more used car imports, you would have many people who would not be able to afford vehicles. There's absolutely no question. There is a demand for these cheap cars. There's no doubt. As Ashik mentioned, there's the Probox. These are cars coming in at very, very, very low prices. So yeah, you would cut out certain people from being able to purchase. However, if there are financing options and things like that, it would allow more, should I say, more financing options. It might allow for more people to enter who normally wouldn't be able to afford a vehicle of a higher value price. So no, it's going to have that kind of impact.
Thank you. Anything to add from our panelists?
Yeah, can I?
Yes.
Yeah, so just to add on that is that if we look at in Kenya before 1994, before liberalization and before second-hand cars were allowed in, we had two assembly plants which were running at very high capacity. The moment the second-hand vehicles came in, the whole dynamics and the assembly plants only running at 20-30%. If there's a demand, I'm sure an investor will come in and invest, as Mr. Frederick has said, that they will come in and invest what the market demand wants, right? So it's basically demand and supply. So I'm sure there will be investors coming in to create that niche market and that creating that supply to that gap, which is going to be created. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashit. I know that Ronnie wants to join us once again. Ronnie, you still with us? You have another question? Yeah, Ronnie, we can hear you. Ronnie? I can see that you raised your hand. You have to unmute. We cannot hear you. Okay, it seems we've lost Ronnie.
Claudia, I'm back online if you can hear me.
Okay, Dave, we are already running out of time, so I would like to give you the chance to sum up a bit, probably the discussion before I hand over for the last round of our panelists. Yeah, Dave, up to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the point about our dependency on imports to meet local demand. Yes, that is the case, and it has been the case. That's what we're trying to change here, is about making mobility affordable. With all, I think, been a tremendous discussion, is bringing in about the right policy. But what's critical in getting this right, sure, it's the policy, but we've got to create the demand. We've got to make it affordable. We've got to make vehicles at the competitive level, at the entry level too, and have the cross-section of mix, with vehicles being, not everyone can own a vehicle, so people can own a used or a new vehicle. We provide affordable mobility solutions in terms of using, sharing, hailing, public transport. So it's really across the whole section, and that was the intention today, was to look at that. And that's how we're going to get this to work, to create the demand. And we don't have all the solutions yet, but the strategy for the continent, I believe, will bring that about. And it's tremendous. We talk about this because it's not simple, but we're on a journey, and we will find the right answers. So from my side, thank you very much for moderating and for the tremendous input from the panelists. Thank you, Claudia.
Okay, thank you so much. So the last round, I would like to know from all of you, where do you see the African automotive industry in about 10 years? And maybe also putting into consideration what is the most important factor for you that will enable affordable mobility? Is it the right financing structures? Is it the political will? Is it digitalization? Serge, from a manufacturer's perspective.
Yes, I think in 10 years, historians will say that the automotive industry has been the major driver of the CFTA, and that we have witnessed a private sector-led regional integration movement. Now, what would drive affordability? Unfortunately, it's not an easy question. It is an ecosystem. And the countries that will have succeeded in putting in place the regulations, the after-sales services, the many things that have been outlined in the Automotive Pact that Dave is a great champion of, will see the cost of vehicles going down, and we see their population access more affordable mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge. Tim, distributor's perspective, where do you see the African automotive industry in 10 years?
Yeah, it's difficult. None of us have a crystal ball, of course. I certainly agree with Serge's comments. I think the industry will change. I think there will be more local assembly. There most certainly has been a lot of progress in the last few years when it comes to local assembly, in spite of some of the challenges that we've seen. I do think personally that there is the political will. We're seeing a lot of changes and a lot of evolution when it comes to that. And I think it's very positive. And I think that the industry is going to go in the right direction. I think the work being done by the AAAM is very valuable. And I think we are going to see a lot more sort of local manufacturing with affordability. It's going to get there. It's going to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Frederick, from a financier perspective.
Well, Claudia, I think we would all have failed if in 10 years the industry is still what it is today. We really need to see this. Africa is at a turning point. The continental free trade area is here with us. If there's any manufacturing Africa can do and trade amongst themselves, the market is there, it's vehicles. And so we really need to seize this opportunity to incentivize the OEMs, develop our regional value chains, and get them to work for us. As a bank, we have pledged $1 billion seed fund that is being deployed as debt, as equity, and also as grants, just to spare the sector. We believe that with the work AAAM is doing and the VDA and all the others that are supporting, there's really an opportunity to develop the sector. We just would continue to encourage all the partners to be aligned, to have faith, and to do what you have to do in your corner to make sure that the sector really develops in Africa, be it policy, be it getting into manufacturing yourself, or being a consumer at the end of the day. But if you consume made in Africa, you produce made in Africa, and you pressurize your government to put the right policies to get the auto sector going, then we're all the better for it. So I think we all have a role to play. And if we do, 10 years' time will be a fantastic Africa that we all want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. Ashid, you said your dream one day is to mass manufacture an assembled vehicle in Kenya for Africa with 80% local content. Do you think your dream will come true in the next 10 years, and what still needs to be done?
I think where we are heading to and what AAAM and Mr. Coffee is doing, integrating everybody, integrating Africa with Europe, with the right partners. And I think it is possible, and that dream will come true before, I think it will come true before this 10 years, I guess. And I think these discussions are actually leading to very good actionable points. And the good thing is that everybody is thinking in the same aligned way and focused, and synchronizing everybody and all the countries which are manufacturing and assembling vehicles. If we all come together, then I'm sure we can make this dream come true. And not only Kenya, but I'm sure the whole of Africa could probably supply vehicles to the rest of the world. And Africa is going to be the most populated continent the next 20, 30 years. So we have a lot of labor workforce, which are very efficient and if trained well, can be very skilled. If you look at the other continents, the population and everything is actually coming down to some of the other continents. So, yeah. Thank you.
Ashit, thank you for this optimistic outlook. Last month at the EU Africa Business Forum in Brussels, a historic memorandum of understanding between 12 private sector automotive associations in Africa and Europe has been signed to develop the automotive industry in Africa. Among them, Afrika-Verein, AAAM, and VDA. In order to fill the agreement with life, a whole series of events are already planned for this and also next year. Let me give you a small outlook. 11th of April, there will be a AAAM and VDA webinar on value chain, sustainable development, and job creation in the African automotive sector. In May, Afrika-Verein members will discuss current trends within our expert circle automotive. And in cooperation with AAAM, VDA, and some Kenyan and Ethiopian partners, Afrika-Verein is organizing a business mission at the end of June. And if you want to join us for this journey, please get in touch with us as soon as possible. In September, Afrika-Verein will organize a webinar on the automotive sector in Ghana. In October, we will organize a big day, two-day forum titled Africa Trade and Invest. And there, the automotive sector will also play an important role. And in the first quarter of 2023, Afrika-Verein plans the second edition of our German African Automotive Forum. If you are interested in one of these events, please feel free to get in touch with me or my colleagues from Afrika-Verein, and please join us not only to Kenya and Ethiopia or elsewhere, but also on the road to affordable mobility in Africa. I wish you all a lovely day and hope to see you next time. And before I finish, there's a survey after this meeting, and we would be very happy if you fill in the questions. Thank you so much to my panelists. Thank you so much for the audience. Thank you so much. Bye-bye to everybody and have a good day. Thank you.